and welcome to the Hit Like a Girl podcast. I'm Joy Rios, and today I'm talking with Maureen Ladouceur. She's the Executive Vice President and Chief Commercial Officer at MMIT. Maureen is passionate about making life-changing drugs and innovative therapies more easily accessible to all patients. As a registered nurse, she saw firsthand what happens to patients and families when access to drugs is delayed or not possible, and I learned a lot from our conversation and think you will too. So let's get started.
I'm Maureen Ladouceur, and I'm the Global Chief Commercial Officer of an organization that is focused on smoothing access to therapies for patients who need life-saving therapies. So that organization that I'm part of is actually right now a couple of different entities that we're bringing together. One of them is MMIT, Evaluate Pharma, the Dedham Group, and Penalgo. So these are all best-in-class, kind of gold standard organizations that are really awesome at what they do, and we're bringing them together to be able to kind of unify around this common mission of smoothing access to therapy for patients who are trying to access drug therapy.
So which kind of therapies are you talking about, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. So I can make this a little bit more tangible. I'm specifically talking about drug therapy, prescription therapy that your physician would give you to be able to get treatment for any type of acute or chronic illness. So in our lives, if we as individuals or our family members have ever suffered from chronic illness, an acute condition, we kind of understand the reliance we have on drug therapy to be able to feel better and get better, to either manage a disease state or potentially even get cured. Drugs are a really big part of our healthcare system and really important. We spend about $500 billion a year in the United States on prescription drug therapy. And it's fortunate that if you look over the last decade or so, there's been a ton of innovation in this space. There's been a lot more technology and being able to get very targeted therapies so that we can treat disease better. A lot of immunotherapies, genomics, just very targeted specialty therapies. So all of that is really, really good. The challenge is that for patients to be able to get access to all of those therapies so that they can get the treatment they need and there's not a delay in therapy, there's a lot of things that have to come together. And a lot of those things that have to come together include it starts with the pharmaceutical manufacturer kind of knowing the right treatment to bring to market because of the people that have a specific disease state, and having the resources to being able to do that. And then from there, as that therapy works its way through the drug approval process, it's physicians knowing that therapy is available and knowing that a patient can get access to it. And then lastly, it's the patient actually being able to get access to that therapy, and then being able to have good adherence because they can stay on the therapy and tolerate it. For all of those things to work and all those pieces of the puzzle to come together, it takes a lot of data, it takes a lot of intelligence, it takes technology to be able to support that workflow. That's what we call smoothing access to therapy, is to being able to facilitate that with the right intelligence and technology. And that's what our organization is all about.
Okay, I have a couple questions and from different angles. One is because the prescription drug monitoring program, how does that come into play into your line of work?
Yeah, it's a really good question because, as you said, there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle to this kind of industry challenge. And I would say where we help to support the flow of all of this is that when a new drug comes to market and there is a set of criteria that payers have on who can access that drug and when is it appropriate for that person to go on that drug, there's a lot of complexity to all that. And what we're going to do in smoothing access to therapy is we're going to help all the stakeholders in healthcare really understand the availability of that drug, the access parameters for being able to get on that therapy, and trying to kind of demystify that. So this specific question around monitoring is a little bit adjacent to the way that we're kind of going about fulfilling our mission.
That makes sense. The reason I ask is because a friend of mine from years and years ago has lupus, and she was sharing with me that she has issues getting access to some of the drugs that she is prescribed,
Hmm.
mainly from what I understand because there's such a watch on like there's the opioid epidemic, people trying to make sure that they're not drug seekers, etc. And
Yeah.
just from your perspective, I literally don't understand what she was going through, and I'm trying to put those pieces together of like, okay, I know that people are trying to do a good job in monitoring, like that there's not overuse, etc. Like we need like the smoothing of the process, right? Like it's all of
Yeah.
these pieces that need to fit together well to make it work for everyone. And anyway, it was something that came up for me recently, and I'm like, oh, you made me help me understand better. 'Cause-
But you understand, so that's actually a really great example. So your friend lupus is a difficult chronic illness, and she's very dependent on drug therapy. Um, Delays in being able to get that treatment or periods of time where she's without that treatment are going to have very negative consequential impacts on her health, and that's really frustrating and scary to have any type of difficulty in getting that therapy. And there's a lot of reasons that go into that. Um, the part of delays in therapy with regard to understanding how patients can get that treatment is a lot of what we help to solve.
so what are some of the biggest, well, challenges, and also what are some of the challenges that you have already overcome? Because I'm sure that it's an ongoing process. It's not like, oh, you fixed one problem and it's solved.
Yeah. No, there's definitely a lot more problems to solve. So when you think about a lot of the therapies that are coming to market right now are very expensive, they're complex. A lot of portfolios that pharmaceutical manufacturers have are dominated by therapies that are very high cost, a lot of oncology, a lot of immunology, things like that that are coming to market. And one of the biggest challenges is to help pharmaceutical manufacturers know the therapy to bring to market because they have the right data about how that drug will perform. And then once they're bringing it to market, is to help them understand what's the totality of individuals that will be able to access that, and therefore what type of programs they should set up to be able to get that drug to patients. Should there be contracting that occurs? Should there be more done to be able to help on the cost side with copay programs? Should there be more done to be able to educate physicians about the availability of this drug? So there's a lot of moving pieces, and I would say that the biggest challenge that kind of remains is having all the data quickly to understand what is the best strategy or the best recipe for that therapy, for that patient population, for that disease state, because there's just a lot of nuance to how the industry has to think about this problem depending upon the actual therapy that's coming to market. So I'd say the biggest challenge is that there's so much variation in what you need to do depending upon what you're seeking to be able to bring to market for patients.
That seems like a pretty complicated decision tree of deciding like who, how much education to bring to whom and when.
Yeah, yes. How much of that, and what are all the things that I need to consider for my drug with the patients that I need to be able to reach and the physicians that need to know that this therapy is available. There's a lot of variation out there. I mean, there are some drugs that come to market that treat something like hypertension or depression, and there's just millions and millions of people that suffer from that condition. And the way you would go about thinking about that would be one way. And then there are very, very targeted therapies where maybe the entire set of individuals who are struggling like that might be a couple hundred people. And that would be more of a rare orphan disease. And the way you would need to think about bringing that therapy to market and leveraging your strategy is going to be very different. And more as we kind of think about innovation coming to this market, more and more therapies are targeted to very specific kind of patient cohorts. And therefore, the precision which you have to think about that is a lot more difficult and a lot more consequential.
And I imagine very effective if you're in a position that you can target with precision those different populations. I mean, there's going to be a larger quantity of smaller groups of people, right? So
Yes.
that would be like, okay, you have to set up this specific educational program maybe times 1,000 instead of just like a blanket, educational piece for
Yeah.
a practice. No.
Yes. And I'll tell you what, my background is clinical nursing. I started my career in nursing. And what is really great about what we're doing together around this mission is the linkage of driving access for patients to the outcome on the other side is something that I can kind of clearly see and connect the dots on. And therefore, that is kind of a very motivating part about continuing to pursue this in the way that we're going about doing it.
Well, that leads me to like the next question. How did you get into this line of work? Can you share with us a little bit more about your professional journey?
Yeah, I sure can. So, from the time I was in, let's say, grade school and started kind of contemplating what a career is and what that would kind of be for me, healthcare was something that I always wanted to do. I volunteered in a hospital in middle school and kind of high school. Decided that clinical nursing was for me. I love science. I loved anatomy and physiology. I loved chemistry. I loved the idea about being able to be close to the patient. Went through undergrad, really, really loved clinical nursing. And then I got into clinical nursing and I was able to see healthcare through a little bit of a broader lens, be able to kind of understand the patient impact, but got to also understand all the other pieces of what made healthcare work. And I had an opportunity to be able to take that kind of clinical acumen and underlying kind of domain fluency and take a role in healthcare technology, kind of on the provider side around clinical software and kind of point of care technologies. And that put me in a position to be able to further broaden how I thought about healthcare. And from there, being able to kind of get that perspective, the opportunity to do something in pharma kind of came into play, which has been great because where I sit now from a healthcare ecosystem standpoint, as I understand deeply the patient impact of decisions that are made. I understand how technology can make healthcare work better in a very direct sense. And I can put those pieces together and now see how the drug landscape and access to those therapies connects with all that together. So it's been an awesome career in being able to have a total healthcare landscape view.
That's great. One of the conversations that has been coming up a lot lately has been how to make sure that the nurse's voice is and perspective is included in a lot of other aspects of healthcare. And so it sounds like you've been able to take that and bring it into the business side. And that's super important because like one of a common theme that comes up with guests is that, that there's a lot of folks that will provide a solution and not necessarily fully understand the problem. And I think that with your experience as the bedside and as a nurse, you're able to kind of connect a lot of dots for folks. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, I have to say, I think nursing it's an amazing career, and anybody that has interest in it, I definitely encourage it for that very reason. There is nothing like having responsibility for somebody's healthcare on a direct basis. There's nothing like standing at a bedside with a patient who is, post-op, who has gotten a difficult diagnosis, who is undergoing difficult chemotherapy care and struggling with all that's involved in that, and being able to help that patient both physically, mentally, being able to help them feel empowered, being an advocate for their healthcare, being able to simplify a lot what's going on, explain it to them, explain it to the family, and then be able to take that experience and look at that as, kind of the smallest unit of the bigger healthcare system and put those things together. That experience is something that you can carry with you into so many different parts of different professional alternatives, and it's something that you can always go back to. And even today, decisions that are made In my current business, I often think back to my days on the floor as a clinical nurse and how those things intersect. And it's just very, very humbling, and it broadens your perspective so you can make good, confident decisions.
I love that. I love all like, so I've been asking everybody, like, what would your 10-year-old self think of what you're doing? But from what you've said, it sounds like as a 10-year-old, you're like, had a pretty clear idea of the direction you were going in. Is that fair to say?
Well, as a 10-year-old, I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. I would say, as a person in high school, I kind of thought I would always be in clinical nursing. I never imagined that you could do anything differently. And the thought was, I love nursing and I want to kind of take care of people and I want to be in healthcare. And what you don't really know and appreciate at that point sometimes in your life is that there's so many other things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm even kind of telling my children now, I have a son in high school, and I'm telling him, look, you may want to study these 2 or 3 things, and maybe you think this is what your major is going to be, and that's great. If you love that, you should go do that. But there, you will likely have jobs in your life that don't even exist today.
Correct.
Because of
That's
how
right.
the pace of change, and you cannot even maybe contemplate all that could be available to you and all that will be available to you. So study what you love, and put your whole self into it. But as you kind of pursue your life and take on different opportunities, be very open to what you think your path could be, and don't be afraid to take a risk, because I never thought I'd be leading a commercial organization on a global basis, for solutions that were involved in smoothing access to therapy with data and technology across healthcare. I thought I would be, in an OR or on a floor. And the ability to kind of open your mind to what can be available to you is I think, really helpful advice.
I think I totally agree. And there's so many jobs, to your point, that exist today that did not exist even 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, even anything social media related. I remember it kind of being like a joke, like, oh, I'm going to be in charge of a company's social media. Like, ha, 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 I'm going to tweet for a living. But that's a real job.
It's a really important job. And that's a phenomenal example of something that is a critical part of what it means to get your message out today. And 20 years ago, nobody could even contemplate that. All the roles in digital, all the roles in tech. There's countless examples of them, which is why I remember many, many years ago, a physician I worked with said to me, there's this statement that's very true, which is, 7 years after you graduate from medical school, 50% of your knowledge is no longer relevant, and you have to, commit to being an ongoing learner. And I think that has broad application in all of our lives, as things keep moving and changing, and continually being open to where the world is going is important.
Yeah, I recognized how much learning I still need to do. And I feel like I'm a pretty curious person, constantly learning. And I'm like, oh, if you had to ask me about NFTs or cryptocurrency or the metaverse, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
But I'm like, apparently that's where we're going. I better like hop on the train soon.
Yeah. A little light reading tonight before you go to bed.
Yeah, right. Just figure that one out real quick. But yeah, the kids that are, just entering the workforce now, it's like life is going to be very different even 10 years from now, let alone 20 or more. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But I imagine the same is true also for therapeutics. And if it's precision now, like if you're able, like, is it just going to get more and more precise, like to the N of 1, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement for sure. That the trends are certainly headed in that direction, and that's a very good thing for us as humans. The more targeted a therapy can be, the more effective it can be, the less side effects we'll have. And what will come with that is all the complexity that we're talking about now, and being able to access those therapies will continue to be an important industry challenge to solve for the industry as a whole, for physicians, for patients, and for everybody kind of in this ecosystem together.
Where would you recommend that, like, I guess on the patient side, if they were looking for resources for something of like, would you be able to point them in the right direction? Or even on the provider side for them to get, like, how does that flow of information typically go? Is it like, should they be waiting to receive it or should they be out there seeking it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sure does. Because your question really kind of gets to when a patient needs a specific drug and a physician wants to be able to prescribe a drug, what do they do and kind of how do they figure it out? And today there's a lot of different systems that are used. There's different EMR technology that can have some of that information. There's what's called patient services hubs that can have some of that information. There's different kind of adjacent resources and technologies. A lot of what our business does is the intelligence that flows through those systems is the work that we're doing. So I would say that moving forward and even today, what patients should do is talk to their physicians about the therapies that they're on and how to kind of get access to that. What physicians should do is continue to kind of tap into the resources they have. And what everybody should know as an industry is that as we move forward and putting these assets together to be able to simplify this technology and workflow, is that the intelligence around this is going to get better and better.
Maureen, thank you so much for spending some time with me. It's been a pleasure just kind of getting to know, and for me, genuinely learning a little bit more about how all of this fits together. If people want to follow you, work with you, connect with you, like, what direction would you point them in?
Yeah, sure. So I would send them to right now, the MMIT website. So it's MMITnetwork.com is a good place to be able to kind of collect some more information about kind of our mission and purpose and the way in which we have to solve these problems.
Wonderful. I will include that in our show notes. So thank you so much.
Okay, you take care. Thank you.